exciting, Amy. It's Bible Worm time.
Yay!
We're not in our usual place this week.
No, we're sitting at a table together in a room with other people who have really lovely singing voices.
They do. That was beautiful.
That was beautiful.
Yeah. We are on a retreat in Missouri, just outside, or Missouri, as I'm told it can be pronounced, maybe. We're on a retreat outside of Kansas City with the Pastoral Revitalization program of the Omaha Presbyterian Seminary Foundation.
Woohoo!
We're here with a group of pastors from all kinds of different traditions. We've got some Presbyterians, we've got some Mennonites, we've got some Lutherans, we've got some United Church of Christ, we've got some Baptists. It's going to be a good day.
Yeah, it is. Yeah, and we're going to record a special episode. Well, actually, you and I are not really going to record it. We're going to start it. And then the good folks who we've been studying with here are going to take us through this text.
I'm so excited.
So we're reading today from the book of 1 Samuel, chapter 1, verses 1 through 20, chapter 2, verses 1 through 10. This is the story of Hannah and then her song, her famous song in chapter 2. It's not the Bible Worm song, though.
No. It would not be so famous if it was the Bible Worm song. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, Amy, last time we were in the story of Aaron and the golden calf back in Exodus 32. Now we are in 1 Samuel. Can you give us a little bit of...
Yeah, it's quite a leap.
Yeah, a little bit of background for what we need to know.
It's quite a leap. Okay, so I'm not going to tell you the whole story. You should read it. It's a good story. But what I think we need to know is this. The Israelites have traveled through the desert. They wandered a long time. They made it into the land that had been promised to them in the story. That's a really different kind of existence. Like when they're in the desert, they're at every moment, it is so clear to them that they are at the mercy of God.
Yeah.
They get manna every day from heaven. That's where they get food. Like they find water or they don't. They can't collect things to provide for their own security. They rely on each other and they rely on God. They're a little bit in crisis mode, because it kind of is a crisis to be wandering through the desert for 40 years. But they've come into the land now, and with that came a really different set of challenges.
Yeah.
It was sometimes not as clear to them, their reliance on God and their reliance on each other. It was not as clear to them their responsibilities to each other and how to make decisions as a group. They no longer have Moses, who has been their leader for such a long time. And so over the course of the next couple of books, at least in the arrangement of the Hebrew Bible and the Jewish tradition, things are kind of getting worse and worse,
yeah.
I would say. We have just finished the book of Judges, which famously has this quite horrific story at the end of it of just complete degradation of humanity in the treatment of women in particular, but really in general. There's this question throughout the book of whether the Israelites should have a human king. The Israelites want one. God keeps saying, no, I'm your king. You're not like the other nations. You're not going to get a king. But by the end of the book of Judges, there's this line that everyone did what was right in their own eyes. And clearly that is not working. And so there is sort of this question as we head into the book of 1 Samuel of what are we going to do about that? How is some kind of leadership going to emerge that the Israelites will be able to receive, whether from God directly or through a human?
Yeah. That's really beautiful. And it's so interesting that, you're talking about the stories of women at the end of Judges. And then this story is going to begin with the story of a woman. Like the transition point is also the story of a woman.
That's right.
And so it's such an interesting kind of way to make the transition. In the Christian canon, of course, the book of Ruth is kind of inserted in between Judges and 1 Samuel, which is different than in the Jewish tradition, but also stories of women,
also
kind of making a way
yeah.
when there wasn't a way.
Yeah, yeah. So, yeah, we're going to turn over the reins today, and I look forward to seeing what kind of magic we can make.
All right, let's do it. All right, so we've got our first group of readers. And so I'll just let us all introduce ourselves. Why don't we start with you?
Ikram Kacho, pastor for First Arabic Presbyterian Church in Des Moines, Iowa.
Laura Agee, First Presbyterian Church in Nevada, Missouri, pastor.
Scott Randall, pastor at the Viola Presbyterian Church and the Wellington Presbyterian Church in Kansas.
Wally Landrum, retired pastor, preaching at a church in Macon, Missouri.
Shemaine Chambers King, pastor of Windsor Presbyterian in Des Moines, Iowa.
All right, so I'll read a little bit of text and then we'll see what we see there. We're reading 1 Samuel 1:1-8, and I'm reading in the Common English Bible. Now there was a certain man from Ramathaim, a Zuphite from the highlands of Ephraim, whose name was Elkanah. He was from the tribe of Ephraim, and he was the son of Jeroham, son of Elihu, son of Tohu, son of Zuph. Elkanah had 2 wives, one named Hannah and the other named Peninnah. Peninnah had children, but Hannah didn't. Every year, this man would leave his town to worship and sacrifice to the Lord of heavenly forces in Shiloh, where Eli's 2 sons, Hophni and Phinehas, were the Lord's priests. Whenever he sacrificed, Elkanah would give parts of the sacrifice to his wife Peninnah and to all her sons and daughters. But he would give only one part of it to Hannah, though he loved her, because the Lord had kept her from conceiving. And because the Lord had kept Hannah from conceiving, her rival would make fun of her mercilessly just to bother her. So that is what took place year after year. Whenever Hannah went to the Lord's house, Peninnah would make fun of her. Then she would cry and wouldn't eat anything. "Hannah, why are you crying?" her husband Elkanah would say to her. "Why won't you eat? Why are you so sad? Aren't I worth more to you than 10 sons?" Okay, so I'm just curious what you all think. If you try to get into the character of Hannah a little bit, what do you think is going on in her? Like, how do you read her as a character? What's going on in her? What is she thinking about?
Woof. She is grieving. She's the depth of her grief and emotion, and then to have someone poke. I feel sorry for her, and I just, man, she's going through it.
Yeah.
To feel like you didn't get enough by not having children, and then to be blamed for getting too much when you get the double portion. And that just is so harsh for her on both sides. I think sometimes we feel like we don't have enough, and sometimes we feel like we have too much, and we get blamed for both.
You're pointing to a really interesting, there's a textual issue in the text. The Common English Bible says in verse 5, he would only give one part of it to Hannah, though he loved her.
Right.
Are you reading the NRSV?
Yeah.
What does it say?
Double portion.
Yeah.
Because
He gave her a double portion because he loved her.
Yeah.
Which totally changes a lot of
changes
things, doesn't it?
everything.
Another
Yeah.
version says a choice portion, so it's the
Oh,
better
the
piece.
better portion.
Wow.
Yeah, the Hebrew there is, it's hard to translate, and so nobody really quite knows.
Yeah, that would be especially harsh if she's getting even more food.
Yeah.
Like as
That's
a
what-
woman,
that's what this translation-
maybe that's a contemporary
But
thing.
it's all the translation
Oh, yeah,
makes
yeah, I
all
see
the
what you're saying.
difference. Yeah.
The Hebrew is achat apayim, which means something like one per face. But the word apayim is, I don't know, you probably don't care about this, is like the word for nostril, and it means 2 nostrils. So she gets 1 for 2 nostrils. And so some people will read that as 1 per face, so she only gets 1.
Yeah.
And some people will read that as 2, like a double, 1 for each nostril, basically, 1 for each face. And so she gets a double portion. And then that because he loved her, or although he loved her. And so I don't know how we settle that as interpreters. If you read it as, you were reading it as double. And so that leads you to, sometimes you get too much, sometimes you don't get enough.
But maybe not run with that since it's uncertain. Yeah.
well, it doesn't matter. She doesn't eat it anyway.
That's true,
Yeah.
that's true. Yeah.
She's in so much grief that she can't
can't even
even,
eat.
whether
Yeah.
it's a choice portion or a single portion or a double portion, she can't even take it in.
Yeah. Why do you think that is?
It is a family issue. And when I feel like she's the first wife, and when you have another wife, this is another trouble. And remind us the story of Sarah and Hagar.
Yes.
And she is, even though her husband said, I am better than 10 kids, but she couldn't see that's the love because she's better in her
Yeah.
soul, you know.
Yeah.
She need the kids because when you have another woman, and also we have a story of Jacob also, the sisters.
Yes.
Yeah.
So we hear echoes of these stories, Sarah and
Yes.
Hagar and Rachel and Leah, from stories that we've read in the book of Genesis. We know this kind of motif that happens. Talk to me a little bit about Penina. What do you think of her?
Even her name she has really ugly name. She's so mean. She's so bragging about her kids, and she feel like, oh, he got your heart, but I get him a kids, and she bragging about the kids, even though the kids coming from God,
Yeah.
You can't make a kids, but she's not nice woman. I feel like she's mean, she's ugly, all of above.
Yeah. Anybody have a sympathetic reading of Penina?
No.
I do.
Yeah, Scott, what do you think?
She's in a weird situation, and at least in one translation, she's the second wife. So here she is, not really being loved,
Yeah.
and that comes out kind of as aggression. I wouldn't say so much anger or attacking, but trying to figure out what to do,
Yeah.
and kind of reaching out for affection.
I love
And
it.
it comes out the wrong way.
Yeah. So she doesn't feel loved for herself, so she's got this other way of being loved, and then she wants to make sure everybody knows about it. Yeah.
Which really, I mean, if I'll go on, it kind of ties into this bigger thing I see in this question. What makes a person's worth?
Mm.
That last verse is really kind of key, and it ties into all the characters, right?
Yeah.
Is it your lineage? Because we start off with this lineage, right? He's the grandson of.
Oh, that's a nice connection back to here's all the family. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And then, is it what you do, what you did, who you are? There's a real question.
Yeah.
And children were so important, right? I think children are so important today, but in a culture so dependent on how many children you have, she did kind of hold all those cards.
Yeah.
So of course, I have this.
Yeah.
Scott was pointing us a little bit to Elkanah's response there at the end. Why are you so sad? Aren't I worth more to you than 10 sons? I'm just curious what you think of his way of entering into that conversation.
I have an answer and a question.
Yeah.
What do you do as a pastor when you're so involved in the story personally? You don't know how much to share, so it's not about you. But we were in 3 years of infertility, so this came up in the lectionary in the 3 years. And the church knows we're in infertility treatments. So there is the question of why am I not enough? And that comes and it goes, and the grief and I learned asking why questions does not help grief. It didn't help here, but to say, it's not just about me, but I'm part of this. And whatever privacy I think I have, which isn't a lot as a pastor, I also want to be able to share and name what's going on and connect with people out there that are going through that. So it isn't just on the text, it's beyond that. It may not be appropriate for here, but but I do think expanding that question of am I not enough, even if somebody says, why doesn't this church do so-and-so?
Yeah.
I think my ego says, well, aren't what I'm doing enough?
Yeah.
It's almost the first question. It's not the last answer, but it's almost the first thing. So
I think he tried the best to calm her down and give her more love, taking care of her. But for Hannah, I'm looking for son. I know you love me, but that's not enough. I need the kids, and that make her, for her, because he has already kids.
Right.
And if she has a kids or not, it's okay, but I will take care for that one. But for a woman or everybody, I need my own. And that's why she don't look at if it is how the love he give it to her, it doesn't compare for what she need, because she look for specific something. And she got it in the end of the story, but a lot of people, they couldn't get it. And that's a lot of people, their wishes to have a child to name me a mom or dad.
And in some ways, it's how you hear the questions, right? Why are you sad? Why are you crying? What is wrong with you? Or an attempt at connection. Why are you sad?
Right.
Why are you weeping?
Mm.
Is this not enough, what we have? Which is how I want to read it.
Good.
This really is a story of grief in three directions. And I was not very sympathetic to Penina at the beginning, but now I'm kind of taking a step back and seeing the grief of all three people in this passage and how they interact with one another, and how do they make those connections and help each other grieve.
Beautiful. Anything else y'all want to say about this section of text?
For me, I still feel like Vanessa, I have a kids. I don't have the love of my husband, but I should just keep it to myself. Why I make somebody worse? In our life, if I have to make something good to encourage you, to take you to that point, is better than I will be like doing evil stuff. Because it mentioned she is make it hard, and she is like, make it worse. Otherwise, you are the one coming to my home. And yeah.
Thank you all.
Thank you.
Okay, so I want to welcome our second group of readers here to the table. If you'd like to go around and introduce yourself, maybe we'll start with Rick.
I am Rick Watson, and I'm the pastor of First Presbyterian Church in Vandalia, Missouri.
I'm Tricia Dillon Thomas. I'm the director of programs at Omaha Presbyterian Seminary Foundation.
I'm Tim Oster, pastor of Bethany Presbyterian Church in Joplin, Missouri.
I'm Melissa Atchison. I'm the pastor of Manhattan Mennonite Church in Manhattan, Kansas.
I'm Bob Dahlgren. I'm pastor at First Presbyterian Church, West Plains, Missouri.
Beautiful. So I'm going to pick us up at verse 9, and I'm reading from the NJPS translation. After they had eaten and drunk at Shiloh, Hannah rose. The priest Eli was sitting on the seat near the doorpost of the temple of the Lord. In her wretchedness, she prayed to the Lord, weeping all the while. And she made this vow, O Lord of hosts, if you will look upon the suffering of your maidservant and will remember me and not forget your maidservant, and if you will grant your maidservant a male child, I will dedicate him to the Lord for all the days of his life, and no razor shall ever touch his head. As she kept on praying before the Lord, Eli watched her mouth. Now Hannah was praying in her heart. Only her lips moved, but her voice could not be heard. So Eli thought she was drunk. Eli said to her, How long will you make a drunken spectacle of yourself? Sober up. And Hannah replied, Oh no, my Lord. I am a very unhappy woman. I have drunk no wine or other strong drink, but I have been pouring out my heart to the Lord. Do not take your maidservant for a worthless woman. I have only been speaking all this time out of my great anguish and distress. Then go in peace, said Eli, and may the God of Israel grant you what you have asked of him. She answered, You are most kind to your handmaid. So the woman left, and she ate and was no longer downcast. Early next morning they bowed before the Lord, and they went back home to Ramah. Elkanah knew his wife Hannah, and the Lord remembered her. Hannah conceived, and at the turn of the year bore a son. She named him Samuel, meaning, I have asked the Lord for him. My translation in verse 10 describes Hannah's state as she is going to pray as wretchedness. She comes to pray in her wretchedness. What kind of prayer is that, or what does that mean to you? I mean, that just feels like a wholly different kind of prayer to come to God in that state. What does that evoke for you?
I think sometimes when we pray, we pray more in a formula style. In other words, we try to make our prayers fit. And when I see that, one of the things that strikes me about Hannah's prayer is and I kind of leads me to my second point, there's nothing fake about this prayer. There's not that prayer is fake, but there's nothing planned. she's just like, here I am, Lord. You know, I'm angry, I'm upset, I'm sad, you know, especially with the previous background that we had from the previous 8 verses. And then I don't know, I guess I get a bit angry at Eli just because of his like lack of compassion, I guess is the word where I'm at that point. But it's I guess if I had to sum it up, it's real prayer.
Yeah.
And you know, I think we've all been there. I know I have.
She said she was pouring out her soul or her heart in your version. That's such a vivid image to pour out one's heart.
We can use words like heartfelt or visceral or genuine or authentic. That prayer was all of that. We've been there. And sometimes you don't know what words to use. But God knows what's on our hearts when that happens.
I like the image of pouring out your heart because it reminds me of going back to the Hebrew, and I'm assuming, I didn't look this up in the Hebrew, but I'm assuming the word heart is the one that we would assume for Hebrew being the center of one's being, and all that term heart evokes in Hebrew. I'm assuming that's correct. That makes it more intense.
Wretchedness that word is different than when I'm looking at the CEB.
Yeah,
it's Hannah was very upset and couldn't stop crying. Wretchedness to me means like I am full of unworth, and I'm there's something about me that needs to be forgiven, and maybe the theology then too. I don't know, but I haven't had a child because I am sinful and I am wretched.
And maybe she does feel that way. I wonder.
So then what about Eli's response? I heard a critique of Eli. Maybe we'll start with the critiques, and then if someone wants to come to his to a compassionate stance on Eli, we can hear that too. What do we think of Eli here?
One of my questions about this text is, why does he think she is drunk? I mean, he's a priest. Surely he's seen people praying before, moving their lips, but it's a silent prayer. Maybe it's linked to that wretchedness. Like maybe she was praying differently than anyone he'd ever seen pray before. Maybe it's a foreshadowing of his ultimate downfall because he's not a good priest. But I just think that's interesting that he would, in his position, think somebody praying like that would be drunk and not just wanting to pray to God.
So I can tell you that historically, the best we know of what prayer looked like at that time, this would have been unusual behavior. You would be praying aloud in a certain way, more like sort of what Rick was describing, like you are praying a particular liturgy, or it's a little more structured, a little more controlled, and she is definitely not in a controlled state. But there is a big jump from that to you must be drunk.
Seems like he gives us a model of what not to do.
Yeah, there's a good, I like
Just
that.
a quick look, and then before he realizes it, words are out of his mouth, and like eggs once broken, words can only be spoken once. And
He's pretty easily convinced that something else is going on there. I did notice that. And she shares how she's come before the Lord in prayer. Here in the New Revised Standard Version, it says, in great anxiety and vexation. Eli, his answer to her is much softer than his criticism. And it's a blessing, telling her to go in peace. God of Israel, grant the petition you have made to him. In other words, let your prayer be answered. His heart is quickly turned, and instead of keeping at her distance, he almost comes alongside of her and says, may such a prayer as yours be answered.
And it kind of, I don't know if I want to use the word redeemed, that might be a bit much, but it kind of gets him back in a better view.
Mhm.
It's actually in some ways pretty remarkable. Like Eli speaks very harshly to her, but she does not scream at him and she does not run away and hide. She answers him about what is going on
And
respectfully, and he hears her and changes his tune. I also don't like his, coming out of the gate with what's the matter with you? Not great, but they do turn it around.
He seems especially brusque in contrast to Elkanah, who was just so compassionate in a previous verse. I'm also really curious about the event that they were gathered for and how overworked Eli was. Right? So here's a moment of, was it common for people to party and to show up?
That's a good question. It's like a wedding reception situation where they won't leave and you can't close the church down because yes, they're having such a good time. Yeah, that's a good question. I want to ask one more question and then I'll turn it over to y'all to see what else is coming up for you. So Hannah is praying desperately for a child and then immediately offers basically to give the child up, which is a different kind of prayer than usually when you're praying because you want something. How do you understand that? What is it that she wants? What is it that is empty in her that she's trying to fill?
Is it an identity
I think so.
that she too wants to have the identity of being the mother, the one who brings life?
Yeah.
Is it service to God? Like her role in this community is to bear and raise children. And without that, she feels like she doesn't have an identity or a purpose.
Yeah.
And I can't help but wonder if she isn't hoping, and we don't have this written in the Bible, but I'm wondering if she isn't hoping, okay, if I have one child and I offer that child as, dedicate that child to the Lord, maybe I'll have another one.
Yeah.
But at least I'll have done something. My portion of humanity will continue. She's seen Penina's children, and I'm sure they may look like her or act like her, or and she's saying, "Gosh, none of the kids have any of my characteristics," and she's saying, even if I give this child to God's service,
The child will be in the world.
The child will be in the world, and there's going to be a bit of me that's still around.
Is there anything else y'all would like to raise up from this section? I feel like I could talk about this section alone for an hour.
It's interesting. Samuel's life and calling is set into motion with his prayer.
Yes,
And Eli has no idea what has been set into motion.
that's right.
As he blesses her and says, may your prayer be answered. Everything is going to change for he and his lineage and
Yes.
their calling and Samuel's calling to be a Nazirite and to be dedicated to the Lord even before the child is conceived.
Yeah.
It sets the stage for all that's going to take place. It's either prophetic or I don't know too many in this day and age that would make such a prayer with that intent.
Yeah.
And I don't know that Hannah knows how all this is going to unfold, or what the future will bring. But it sets everything into motion.
Yeah. This is a big moment for the unfolding history.
Does this then speak to the power of prayer? Power that may be well beyond anything that we might conceive that God would do in God's response?
The deal making with God makes me
Bargaining.
squirm.
Yeah.
Is that really how prayer works?
Yeah. It's a really good question.
And she has a sense of relief after that prayer. Then the woman went her way
Yes.
and ate and drank with her
Yes.
husband. And her calmness was sad no longer.
Yes.
Just let that prayer right there.
Yeah.
And that's a nice model. She was able to turn all of those worries over to God and then start off
Yes.
in the next step of life.
That's an incredible leap of faith.
That's my favorite part of the story is that after the prayer, she feels some peace and she's able to eat. She's able to, sort of rejoin the land of the living, even though nothing has happened yet. Maybe she feels certain it will. Maybe she just feels the sort of catharsis of having offered it to God.
I love that bookend of that story. And I think the other bookend, and it's your translation, that is, I think, the most powerful translation is where it says Hannah rose. Like she had had enough and she rose and decided to have some agency or to do something or go to God, but she was no longer going to just sit. She was going to do something with that. And then she does. And then there's the other bookend where she leaves with more peaceful countenance.
It's a model of prayer. I like that term.
I'm very curious whether she went prepared to take this action, this prayer at this special place and time, or was it spontaneous?
Or did it just happen?
Yeah. I never thought about that.
I think we probably need to pass the torch to the next discussion group, but thank you.
Okay, so why don't we introduce this next group? We'll start over here.
I'm Shannon Borgman. I am the pastor of the Oregon Trail, and we are located in Marysville, Frankfort, Washington, and Blue Rapids, Kansas.
Pastor of the Oregon Trail is such a cool title.
It's great.
Yeah. All right.
Not so cool. Bill Warhover, pastor of Monticello First Presbyterian Church.
That's pretty cool too.
Yeah.
I'm Shelley Holly, and I'm the Lutheran pastor of the Lutheran Church in Oberlin, Kansas, and a Presbyterian church in Colby, Kansas.
I'm Craig Gibson. I'm the pastor at Shawnee Presbyterian Church in Shawnee, Kansas.
I'm Christina Adams. I'm one of the pastors at First Baptist Church in Lawrence, Kansas.
All right, so what has happened in the little brief interlude between the chapter 1, verse 20, where we were, and chapter 2, where we're picking up, is that as we found out at the end of the last section, Hannah has conceived and she has the child. And when he turns 3, so once he has been weaned, she brings him back to Shiloh and she dedicates him to the temple, and he goes into the service of God and the service of Eli at the temple. And so then Hannah sings a song. Women in the Hebrew Bible, in the Bible in general, sing songs at important moments. And so we might think of Miriam's song, Crossing the Red Sea, or Deborah's song in the book of Judges, or Hannah's song here, or Mary's song when she finds out about the birth of Jesus. And so Hannah is part of this tradition of women singing at transition points. So what we'll read now is Hannah's song, and we're going to work on the first half of it in 2:1-5. I'm reading in the Common English Bible. Then Hannah prayed, "My heart rejoices in the Lord. My strength rises up in the Lord. My mouth mocks my enemies because I rejoice in your deliverance. No one is holy like the Lord. No, no one except you. There is no rock like our God. Don't go on and on talking so proudly, spouting arrogance from your mouth, because the Lord is the God who knows, and he weighs every act. The bows of mighty warriors are shattered, but those who were stumbling now dress themselves in power. Those who were filled full now sell themselves for bread, but the ones who were starving are now fat from food. The woman who was barren has birthed 7 children, but the mother with many sons has lost them all." So I don't know for sure what I was expecting Hannah to sing about at this moment in her story, but I'm not sure this was it. So I'm just curious what you noticed about Hannah's song and the kinds of things that caught your attention.
It kind of took me to Isaiah, where things are getting evened out. Things are, the higher being made low and the lower being raised up, and things are being made right and even. But I noticed you had a different word in your translation in the first verse.
Oh.
I was questioning because mine was, "I shall raise my horn."
Yes.
And you said something about strength.
Yes.
And because when it was the word horn, I thought, oh, my horn is lifted high, and the image of the shofar came to mind,
Yes.
which would be an announcing
Oh, interesting.
trumpet. I have something important to say.
Yeah.
And then, spoiler alert, I got to the end of reading all of the text, and the horn is mentioned again with anointing. And it took me to the purpose of the horn in anointing and
that's lovely.
consecrating
Yeah.
and making something holy.
Yeah.
This holy thing has happened. So, but then your translation totally took all the way because it just went to strength instead of horn.
So the Hebrew there is karen, which literally means horn. And what the Common English Bible has done is to say oftentimes the horn is a symbol of military power, and so strength. And so that's the decision the CEB has made. But I like the way you're thinking about, the horn itself as an object actually has different significances, and maybe we should let all of those play around in this text a little bit. I like that a lot.
Well, I was drawn to the strength. My strength is exalted in God, so it's lifted up in God. And so if it's military strength, then that's that reference back to God is our strength, our salvation.
Yeah.
God is the one who accomplishes our battles, who wins our victories. And so there's something about that where Hannah's grabbing onto this very male understanding of God's intervention in life and saying, God did that for me.
Mm-hmm. Oh, that's interesting. Yeah.
I think I came to it in the initial knowing its song language with great hope. For finally, we get to hear Hannah speak. Everybody's been speaking for her in lots of different ways for the most part. And finally, we get to hear her speak. And I was surprised at her heart because a heart of someone who has known such brokenness, wretchedness, sorrow, lament, quickly turns what seems like gratitude and thanksgiving to boastfulness and almost a vengeful kind of proclamation in this song.
So there's this is what you mean, there's the one side of this song, which is the poor have been lifted up and the hungry have been fed and the barren have borne children. And then there's also the opposite movement, which is, and those who were on the top of the heap have moved to the bottom. Those who are full have become hungry. Right. So there is this sort of reversal in the one sense, in the positive way. I mean, I don't know, I'm putting positive and negative terms on there, and I don't know if they belong there or not. What did y'all make of that reversal kind of motif, Greg?
Well, the reversal is interesting. I'm not sure what to do about. Here she's singing this where she's giving away her blessing. So the reversal is maybe the ultimate reversal there. I have 3 children and raised them into adulthood. Not sure how. But that being the case, I want them all to be holy. I want them all to be faithful, but I want them all to live their life normally. And here she's saying, no, my one and only, and he's God's.
Let me just grab onto that for a second, because
I hope I'm hearing it wrong.
No, that's great. And it's part of the story that I always have to sit with and wrestle with, because so we're going to stand up there and read a story about this woman who was barren, and then she gave it to God. And that was the ultimate blessing, and how distorted we can get and how distorted the world gets in the messages around children and who the children belong to and who has the care and where they should be. And so I just think it's good to hold the difficulty of that and be real. I mean, Hannah's name means favored. And then the one child she has is, well, off in the temple, off you go. And this is what she was wretched about earlier, is the loss of child. And then so I think we need to hold that. I love that you brought that in, because we need to hold that tension. Because how painful, and as pastors giving this story and talking about this story before we jump to the song and say everything's great, hold the tension of what just happened.
And it wasn't only, though, initially the loss of child, it was son. There was no son.
Right. So this is the loss of legacy. This is the loss of heir. This is.
And if it was a daughter that was born, this could not have happened. This transition of giving him to the temple could not have happened.
As you were talking, Shannon, the story of John the Baptist, baptizer, and the story of Jesus came screaming back into my mind. That comparison, that crossing the two testaments, the two timings, all three of them being not necessarily pushed out, several, and did it on their own, but what in the world are we doing? And how do you preach this to a family with little children? Way to go. You brought us one more. We can send them back to the church. I don't think that's going to preach very well.
Imagine if you told all these churches that are waiting for people to bear children so they have more children in the church. Sorry, you don't get to keep the children in the church.
Yeah.
You have to give them away to God. Somewhere outside of the church.
But we're going to keep it.
I think you might have.
Sorry, Bobby.
I was trying to decide if Bill's breath was purposeful.
Well, I just, I think in part, Hannah is saying everything belongs to God.
I love that.
And life and death comes from God. And so what she has done is no different than how she lives. And in part, to maybe say culturally it doesn't make sense to us, but maybe it makes great sense to her. Coming out of a community where I interacted a lot with Sisters of Mercy, parents are elevated when one of theirs becomes a priest, a sister. So I get that part of it. I get that boast, even though most are humble. But at the same time, I don't know that there's a separation for Hannah. I think it's all part of the whole.
As we've been making our way through the narrative lectionary, we saw a couple of weeks ago in Exodus 13 that God has a claim on the firstborn of all of Israel. And that usually seems like it plays itself out with people making sacrifices or something like that, not actually giving the child over. And so in some sense, she's exactly fulfilling that expectation, but she's doing it in this kind of extraordinary way. I love the way that you're connecting it to that's her choice, if it is indeed her choice. And so she has made that. But I love this sort of questioning of whether this makes Hannah sort of an example that should be followed by all, or whether she is sort of the uniqueness of her story is exactly the point.
But isn't that what we do in baptism? We say, I give this child to God. This is now a child marked as God's own. This is not, and I get the privilege, though, of helping to raise that child, which is what is different in the story. But in the anointing, which is where that horn went with me, is that anointing, we have the anointing in baptism, that this is a child of God, given over to God.
My mind has been thinking about the grief in this story, so didn't tie in with everyone else's, about how she is giving up her son. And so, this is a hymn of praise, but there's also grief in it somehow. And so I've just been reading the first lines. My heart rejoices in the Lord, rejoicing while also grieving that you're giving up your child. And then in verse 5, thinking about the women who then lost their many sons and the people that had enough food that weren't, thinking about the grief there and thinking about how somehow for Hannah, there are some women that just really enjoy pregnancy and really want that experience. Maybe that's part of what she wanted, was just the experience of that. And that experience, she's I think that'll be enough for me. If I can have the experience of pregnancy and childbirth and of nursing, maybe that's enough and I can give the rest to God. I don't know, because I'm how do you reconcile that of being willing to be able to give up your child at such a young age? There was something for her, I think, that said, you know what, I think this little part is enough of what I want. This is enough. And if God is going to give me this blessing, I want this blessing to be a blessing for others too. And so this little part of Samuel's life is going to be enough for me to be a part of.
And I like to imagine that if she had not made that promise to God, do you think God would have still given her that child? And so I like to imagine that maybe the answer is yes.
Yeah.
That promise was above what she needed to give in order to receive the blessing that was meant for her. And so, that's the story we have. But was that the story we needed to have? Because Eli, if you go back to the verses, Eli doesn't say, okay, go tell God that you'll give him your firstborn and then God will give you a child. Like, there's no pastoral advice that leads her here. That's just the sacrifice that she's willing to make. So I like that you pulled out. Does she know that would be enough to fulfill this call that she feels?
But I think there's a sacrifice given by her, but I think she also gains an honor in the fact that I have a child that is going to do things for God. That as giving him over to God and to the temple, I think there's an honor, kind of like you referenced with the Sisters of Mercy. I think this child has got a greater purpose, and I have been able to initiate that through the birthing and giving.
And that's
that
her
role.
choice. It's not a choice that anyone has told her she has to make. It's not a choice that anybody has defined for her. It's the choice she makes in the conversation with God. So that's why I would like to think that even if she made a different choice, God would still honor her with the blessing that Hannah's meant to have.
Did the child come from lament or come from bargaining?
Right.
Yeah.
Right. And you think about that back in all the stories back in like Abraham when he bargains and different places where people bargain with God. Moses when he bargains at the bushes, and you're like, well, is it going to play out that way whether or not they make the bargain? And so what is the role of bargaining?
And she doesn't ask her husband's permission. She makes the decision ahead of time. This is between me and God. Yeah.
And she says in verse 3, talk no more so very proudly. Let not arrogance come from your mouth, for the Lord is the God of knowledge, and by him actions are weighed. And so God is the deciding factor.
Well, and to follow up just a moment on that, what you were saying, she went without her husband.
Right. To the temple.
To the temple.
To the temple.
To the shrine, yeah.
To that particular one.
I really love this drawing out of the
yes,
complex of emotions in Hannah's character. And actually, if you go back, Christina, in the section that we didn't read, the first year when she had an opportunity to take Samuel, the newborn Samuel, to Shiloh, she didn't do it. She said, I'm going to keep him at home until I wean him. And Elkanah sort of says, okay, do what you want. And so there's a moment where she sort of hesitates a little bit. And then she waits until he's 3, and then she does take him. And so I do think there is this kind of complex of emotions in that character that when you read it the way we've sort of laid it out here, it's she had a baby and then she sang a song. But it's really she had a baby. It was complicated to decide to give him up, redecide to give him up, and then she did it. And then she sings this complicated song. Y'all, thank you so much for this reading. That's really, really lovely.
Thank you.
All right, so we have our fourth and final group of readers up at the table. I'm going to invite you to introduce yourselves before we start.
I'm Kristen Pike. I'm the pastor of Community United Presbyterian in Hartford, Iowa, and Carlisle Christian Disciples of Christ in Carlisle, Iowa.
Hi, I'm Chris Miller. I'm the senior pastor at Pine Ridge Presbyterian Church here in Kansas City, Missouri.
Rick Behrens, pastor at Grandview Park Presbyterian Church in Kansas City, Kansas.
Ruth Harder, pastor of Rainbow Mennonite Church, also in Kansas City, Kansas.
Beautiful. So we are picking up in 1 Samuel chapter 2, verse 6, and I am reading from the NJPS. The Lord deals death and gives life, casts down into Sheol and raises up. The Lord makes poor and makes rich. He casts down. He also lifts high. He raises the poor from the dust, lifts up the needy from the dunghill, setting them with nobles, granting them seats of honor. For the pillars of the earth are the Lord's. He has set the world upon them. He guards the steps of his faithful, but the wicked perish in darkness, for not by strength shall man prevail. The foes of the Lord shall be shattered. He will thunder against them in the heavens. The Lord will judge the ends of the earth. He will give power to his king and triumph to his anointed one. So I think I want to ask you all first to just maybe pick up a little bit of the conversation that the group before us was having. I also, when I first read this, it feels like such a stark emotional contrast to the text that we were just in. And I'm wondering if you read them as more sort of interlaced, or if you really see sort of a stark contrast. If this really feels like a song of triumph and confidence, or if you read some of the rest of Hannah's, I don't know, like grief and vulnerability into it.
I think there's certainly both elements there. And it is that hope and confidence born out of someone who has navigated grief. I think there's a difference between what I might call a naive hope, right? Everything's great, God is wonderful, and it's fine to say that, but you hear it differently from someone like Hannah, who has known pain and has known grief and has known struggle. And so for her to say, this is who God is. This is the foundation of my hope. That comes from a place of strength.
And yet, to me, it's so not personal at all. This is so cosmic in scope. This is God doing this, for all of us and for this huge community. There's nothing in here that reads like, this is my personal grief I'm bringing to this. It's all very, so in a sense, so high above her and so much above her own personal story that you could read this. If you hadn't read the chapter before, you would have no idea that this was written. This is a song of a woman who was barren and has now given birth to a son and given him to the temple. You would have no idea that that's what it's about.
That's right.
The first thing I wrote down was what a difference 3 years can make.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
And I also jotted down, there's echoes, or there's a question of, has the oppressed become the oppressor in where we've traveled? The victim turned into the victor. There's a lot of vengeful language in this song that I don't know what to do with.
Yeah, there's this like reversal, and so that feels good when it when
says you're at the upper end.
Yeah,
now.
the oppressed will be uplifted, but then there are other ways of pushing people down that feel vengeful and uncomfortable, very uncomfortable.
So has she become Peniel?
Yeah.
Or did I say it right?
Yeah, Penina.
Has she become?
Yeah.
I always just found it interesting that we're talking about a king. We don't have a king at this point.
Yes, thank you.
And that we're, exalting the power of the anointed, which then you're like, okay, that's the Messiah. So we're anointed. What are we doing here now? And what did this have to do with having a baby?
Yes. So most of the song seems to be this sort of reversal of fortunes in all kinds of different environments. And then the last part of it, all of a sudden we're talking about a king. What does that have to do with anything?
Yeah, you don't.
I think it's the issue of transformation, right? Transformation in Hannah's identity, transformation, the reversal or the inversion, whatever language you want to use for that she sees coming from the power of God, and foreshadowing the eventual transformation of the whole community in the way that they're making sense of their relationship with governance and with God and one another. And I think it's there's this element of going, yes, we want to see the poor lifted up. We want to see, we want to cast this in positive terms, but turmoil would be another word for it, right? Where the way of the world, the way that we have known, all of a sudden is going to get flipped on its head. And for some people, that's going to be really good news. And for other people, because it's not just, both our chunk here in the previous group, right? Those inversions, it's not just the poor are lifted up. It's not just the hungry are fed, and it's that the people who have had are going to be brought low. It's not we're bringing everybody to the same level.
Yes.
We're flipping it.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
And that's dangerous.
But I don't know. I feel like her experience being on the bottom, I don't know, in verse 7, it says the Lord makes poor and makes rich, but then it doesn't say that the Lord makes the poor rich. It says the Lord raises the poor up. And to me, that's kind of a statement on her part that she will always be poor. She will always be coming from the underside. And that even if but that the Lord lifts her up anyway. And that the Lord lifts up the poor, not to become rich, not to become the oppressors, but to live in a different kind of relationship and community. That's kind of what I hear, because I think her chords of empathy have been stretched to the breaking point, and but they're still intact. She still feels strongly what she feels about justice and about what's right, and that the world doesn't get set right by the poor becoming rich. That's a different story.
Yeah.
And that in a lot of ways, at least for me, the interpretive center of this, right, is in that last stanza of verse 8. For the pillars of the earth are the Lord's, he has set the world upon them, right? Everything leads to that, right? The Lord deals death and gives life, casts down, makes poor and makes rich, all of those things, because the pillars of the earth are the Lord's, right? It's all leading to that point that we have this foundation, this steady place in God. And while other things may experience upheaval, God will not be inverted. Mm-hmm. God is not going to change.
Mm-hmm. Like, I feel like a lot of the inversions or just, differentiation there is sort of like, you don't actually know how the system works. Like, you might think you know what's going to happen, but you don't actually know what's going to happen. But it's not that things are random, because there is God behind this system that she's imagining, but it's just, that's harder to see. And so what we see are these social forces or things in people's lives that we think are absolute, but they are not. Okay, my last question for you, and then I'll see if you have other things you want to put on the table, is probably because of this song, at least within the Jewish tradition, Hannah is considered a prophetess. And so I'm wondering, as you read this, if there is something about this that feels prophetic, which could be a way of seeing what's in the future, or it could just be a way of saying like a special channel to the divine. Is there something that feels prophetic about this song to you?
I think it's often pointed to as evidence of what we call, God's preferential option for the poor. Mm-hmm. And so in that way, I think it's very prophetic.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
For me, I think, it's an easy yes.
I love an easy yes.
Well, and like I said earlier, it's not personal. I mean, it reads like, you could almost put this in the Psalms or in, a number of the prophets and just substitute it right in, and you'd never miss a beat. I'm really glad this was not on the Bible content exam. Like, where did this come from? Because I probably would have missed it, because it doesn't read like it's coming from this heartbroken woman at all.
Yeah. I guess, what is she being prophetic about? The painting that she does with this song puts God as a very vengeful God. God has enemies. In the translation I read, God has enemies. What do we make of that? And prophets, we laud them maybe. They're also hard to know what to do with.
Yes.
They seem a little unhinged. How do we how do we make sense of God having enemies?
Yeah. I don't have an answer to that question. It's a very good question, but I love the word unhinged that you use is making me sort of think back to the description of Hannah as like coming in her wretchedness and just being completely
unglued,
open and unglued, and like this is what I've got, and the way that can potentially open some kind of channel, maybe.
You're that raw and vulnerable.
Yeah.
Do we know anything about relationship with Psalm 113 to this? Because
That's a
it's
great
directly
question.
quoted.
Yes. There's I almost said that before when you were pointing. Yes, there's a line from Psalm 113 in here, or vice versa, however you want to talk about them. I don't know anything about the history of which one pulled from which one. I'm sure there are theories about it, but I think it goes to the point that this kind of song is much more sort of cosmic and true to the overall story than immediately relevant to Hannah.
Mary's Magnificat hasn't come up yet. Mother of Jesus also sings a song that echoes Hannah's song. In some times in history, that song has been banned in countries because it's like a call to a revolutionary call. And it's deemed as a threat sometimes to the powers that be. So I think there's, I like to imagine Mary singing that song to infant baby Jesus, rocking him. Did Hannah have this song on her lips while she was in a state where her lips were moving, but her voice wasn't heard, or her voice was silent?
Yeah.
She's found that voice now. Did she sing to young Samuel as in those 3 years of weaning? And then how was he influenced by that song and prayer? I like to imagine that.
I love that image. And Samuel, who will, bring about the inauguration of the first king of Israel. Yeah. Is there anything else on your hearts and minds that you want to make sure that we put on the table?
I think the only thing I didn't hear come up in all the conversations was just the idea of blessing. Because, children were always seen as a blessing from the Lord. And just the fact that, that's kind of underwriting all this, that not only is Hannah socially having an issue, she would feel like she's disconnected and not been blessed by God. So she would feel even more less than as she went into the temple, as she went in to pray and bring all this before God. So just that idea of when we talked about her wretchedness, just that fact that she probably even felt like God had not blessed her.
Yeah, this sense of disconnection from the human community and the intergenerational community, and also this sense of disconnection from God. Yeah, that's a recipe for wretchedness.
I want to hear you sing, Amy.
What?
We have all been blessed with your voice this week. Is there? Do you have in your liturgy Hannah's song?
I do not. Shemaine was asking me this before. Okay. This text is read in the Jewish community on Rosh Hashanah, which is already a 5-hour service, and so we don't add any songs. But thank you for the invitation. So for the last few minutes of every podcast, usually Bobby and I try to imagine okay, we've opened lots of buckets, opened lots of doors, put a lot of questions on the table, but some people need to preach this on Sunday, or some people are looking for a message for their community now. So I want to invite y'all, if you have a particular message, a concise message that you would want to lift up from this text and maybe explore for your community, that you want to come up and share, just come on up and take one of the seats at the table, offer your thoughts, and when you're finished, you can move to the side so someone else can come up.
At one point, I inherited a church that had traditions for Mother's Day, where all mothers were celebrated and lifted up. And I took that opportunity to say, maybe we need to do this differently, because there are those who, like Hannah, longed to be a mother but never had that opportunity. And this is actually a painful day for them. This is a day of grieving for them, or maybe they were a mother that lost a child. And so we're keeping them away from the Sabbath and from our time of worship if that's our focus. So how can we evaluate this service in a way that honors all women wherever they are in that process? So how about if we honor the gifts of women as opposed to only holding up the mothers? Let's recognize that there are different kinds of mothers. There are foster care mothers. There are our Sunday school teachers and our grandmothers and our aunties who are all mothering children in a variety of different ways, and that giving birth is not something that everyone physically is able to do. So let's not hold them apart in a negative way.
Yes. So important.
Which in this story, we really have that message of grieving for not being able to birth, which she then is later able to do, but some cannot.
That's right. That's right. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you.
To keep with the theme, for me, one of the resonances is that the blessing from Eli and Hannah's reception and raising up after hearing that blessing comes prior to conceiving the child, right? And that as I think about having spent time with this text or preaching the text, it is the idea that the blessing is all not separate from the child, but kind of, right? That you don't, the issue around bearing a child is not linked inherently with receiving God's blessing, and that the blessing and the transformation that Hannah has comes first.
Yes.
And I think so often, some of us have been kind of around the corner discussing one of the thorny issues of this is how do you preach this and similar texts, whether it's around fertility issues or childbearing, which is painful for so many of us for all sorts of reasons, and or healing narratives, right? That whole issue of how do you preach this? Isn't this amazing that this thing happened? And you're preaching it, you're looking at the person in the pew 10 feet away that's probably not going to experience that, right? And so how do you faithfully say that? And I think there's such beauty in saying blessing and healing come in ways that don't necessarily mean the prayer is answered the way we expect it to be.
Yes.
And that Hannah begins to find healing. She begins to, I think you maybe even used the phrase, come back to the land of the living, right?
Mm-hmm.
She starts eating again before the child
she gets
shows up,
the
right?
thing that she has prayed for. Yes, thank you. That is so critically important. Thank you.
So to me, the story of Hannah is, and the story of bearing a child, it is such a familiar story, which is, I think, why sometimes, so many times we get those stories around women, because that's such a familiar story, a familiar pain, a familiar experience of life, a familiar thing we struggle with. And I think that opens it up so that we can actually get to the prayer of Hannah, which isn't about bearing a child. It's about God reversing the world and causing that chaos and that upheaval and that shift of power to recognize people who maybe aren't recognized usually, and to bring down that arrogance that sometimes we carry into the world. And so I think we can walk gently into the story of Hannah and be careful not to put so much emphasis on this is about a woman getting a child. Because what follows is what she teaches us about the world and about God, which is so far from women bear children and that's their blessing and so forth.
Yes.
It is so much more. God is going to come and do this great thing among us. God is going to do this reversal. And Hannah, that's how her story is heard, is because she takes this personal, real experience that many of us understand and know. And then that gets told. And in telling it, we can hear a whole nother promise from God.
Thank you.
Yeah, I stepped back from this, and I kind of see this, the phrase that came to mind in my case, so I was thinking about how to preach this, was prayer and promise. And that's maybe the title for the message, because it is a bigger picture of how we can come to God in prayer in the seasons of our life, and how maybe we are impacted by others in prayer. I'm thinking of Penina's response, or sort of the chiding of where Hannah is, but the overshadowing of God's promise. I'm reminded, and I forget the citation, but there's a scripture passage, and it says, "Have you not heard? Have you not seen? I am doing a new thing." And I think that model of real prayer that I talked about earlier, and coming to God exactly where we are, and as people, and as a community of faith. Where is our community? Where are we as a community of faith in our time and in our place? And also the glory of God's promise. God's going to do something if we come. One of the initiatives in our Presbyterian is Prayer Warriors, and we just got that started with our new exec. And she commented at the Presbyterian meeting that this is powerful. We need to, all of our churches need to be praying together, and I think we need to be bringing our prayers to God, and we need to look for God's connection and see the new thing that God is doing in our midst, or we're going to miss it.
Thank you.
Amy, what an amazing conversation. We should do this every week.
Let's only do special episodes from now.
Let's do it with this group here. We're all just moving in. Moving in together. Yeah. Thank you all. Let's give ourselves a hand.
Really beautiful.
And it is wonderful to be here with you in person.
It is a
once.
pleasure.
We'll be back
I know.
on Zoom again next week.
Three-dimensional. And we both wore purple today. I don't know what that says about the cosmos, but it says something.
Yeah, something important, but unknown. All right, Amy. Well, I don't know what we're doing next week, but I'm sure it's going to be exciting. So,
I can't wait.
Yeah. I'll see you then.
Bye.
Thanks for joining us for this special episode of Bible Worm, recorded live at the Heartland Retreat Center in Parkville, Missouri, with pastors from the Omaha Presbyterian Seminary Foundation's Pastoral Leadership Revitalization Program. If you've enjoyed this free podcast, we hope you'll help us keep it going by joining our Patreon for as little as $4 per month. You can also sign up for other goodies like early access, video lectures, weekly liturgies, and more. Visit patreon.com/BibleWormPodcast for details.
Bible Worm is produced and edited by Bobby Williamson. Our theme song is sung by Colin Bagby, and our theme music is The World at Large by Dano Songs. Many thanks to all of our Patreon supporters for helping make this podcast possible.
Join us for our next regular episode when Amy and I will be discussing God's promise to David in 2 Samuel 7, 1-17. Until then, keep on digging.